And we're good to go.
We're good to go. Awesome. Welcome, everyone, to a very special presentation from the team at QUBEdocs. Today's presentation is What's Lurking in Your Planning Models. Dun, dun, dun. My name is Scott Sambucci. I'm an advisor to QUBEdocs, and I'm going to be kind of running controls here just to make sure that in the chat box, if you guys have any questions along the way, any ideas you want to share. You know, we've got a small group. We kept it as a small group because we want this to be a discussion as much as it's going to be a presentation. I think all of us are kind of like Zoom fatigued. And so just sitting there and like watching yet another presentation may not be the most exciting thing. So if instead we can turn this into a discussion, I think there'll be some ample opportunities for you to ask questions, maybe even take you off mute, get a little bit of conversation going as well, because if you're like any of the folks that QUBEdocs works with every day, working and building and planning your planning models is one of the most challenging things that you have to deal with each and every day. So our special presenter today is Scott Felton, and I actually printed out Scott's bio because I wanted to make sure I was getting it right. So Scott is he's been working at the intersection of data analytics and documentation for over 20 years. I was just joking a little bit a moment ago before some of you logged on that Scott's a man that when you get him talking about models, all you have to do is wind him up. The more you wind him up, the more he goes. So he's done everything from automating technical support articles for one of the 100 largest websites in the world. And he's also documented over $1 trillion, that's a T, trillion dollars in global revenue planning models. And so they're certainly seeing his share of complexity at scale when it comes to your planning model. So all of this has led him and his team to settle on and really identify these 4 key pillars that we're going to talk about today in the context of answering this question, what's lurking in your planning models? And if you can identify and more importantly, implement these few fundamental pillars, it can really greatly reduce the risk of unexpected errors and increase the confidence that you have, your organization has, to build more nimble FP&A models. So in today's discussion, we're going to talk about the hidden complexity of T1 models and how these four simple concepts can really change the way you think about risk and rewards and inherent to you. So just for context, the other folks that are here, you'll see in the chat box. So we have Scott Felton, who's the GM and head of sales and marketing at QUBEdocs. Stephanie Joyce is in the chat box with us as well. And on screen, Keaton Alexander and Ross Lingang as well. So they're all part of the team, and you can see by the numbers here, the team has got a huge amount of experience working with over 50 global partners, hundreds of global customers, and they've now documented thousands of models. So, you know, Scott, in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to you. And really, if you think about like, why does QUBEdocs do what they do? It's really about these sort of key steps, like making sure your models are fully documented, making sure developers find the latest code, helping your help desk enable support, project managers, how they can predict and report, getting solutions owners to feel confident about delivering models to the executives in the team and the organization, and of course, as executives, making sure they make better decisions. So, you know, obviously creating the right planning model affects each and every part of the organization, and we've certainly seen that now more than ever over the last few months. So a couple of the use cases here from QUBEdocs is about automating documentation, knowing exactly what's going on with your model and how to continuously improve. And we'll talk a lot more about that as we go. But ultimately, what we want to do is talk about these 4 pillars and really answer this question, what's lurking in your planning models? And I should mention at the end of the conversation today, I mean, Scott's, like I said, we're going to wind him up and let him go in just a moment or two. But at a lot of times at the end of a conversation like this or a discussion, people ask like, hey, could I get a little more help with this? Or could I get some more visibility on my own model, thinking about these 4 pillars? So at the end of the conversation today, we'll talk about how you can get a little more help from Scott and his team by scheduling in a small session with them that they'll do with you pro bono to help you identify some of the key elements and applying some of what he's going to be sharing today. So how are we doing, Scott? You ready to rock and roll here? Good to go? Got a big thumbs up? Okay.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
awesome.
let's have a chat. Let's have a chat about that.
Awesome.
So we're going to make you the presenter, and I'll turn it over to you. And in the chat box, folks, if you have any questions along the way, just type the question in or just type the word question, and we'll make sure we get to it. Over to you, Scott.
Thanks. And hey, everyone. You know, the first thing I want to do is apologize for my fancy background. I just couldn't help it. It's like I wanted to be like I was on a 60 Minutes, like, we're going to get the model monsters. So I'm going to spare you the moving, making you dizzy background, and just show you the beautiful place where I live. Which is Oregon, and it's a little smoky right now, but don't worry. Fires are a natural part of forests out here in the West, and they will recover, they will grow back. In fact, the area that you're looking at right there is probably burnt, 5 or 10 times in the last 100 years. So, so we're all good here in Oregon, and I'm looking at the screen. Usually, we turn our cameras on and off. You guys are welcome to turn them on, turn them off, whatever you want. If you have any questions, just go ahead and throw them into the chat. We will take a few questions at the end. So, I don't know the best way to start this, except for Scott and I have been working together now for 4 or 5 months, and QUBEdocs is this little software company. We've been growing a lot over the last couple of years, and he and I were talking about, how do we talk about documentation, our product? And I said, God, it's kind of boring. Documentation just isn't one of those things that people really talk about that much. And I was mentioning to him that we used to go to these conferences in person, and we used to see each other after the conference. We'd be down in the hotel lobby, at the bar, or whatever. Several of you, we've been out, and the conversation usually went something like, hey, what's going on? What's new? And one of the things that I always talked about was this idea that models, TM1 models, and I know most of you, and I know that almost everybody here works with TM1, that a TM1 model, like the metadata of a model itself, it kind of is subject to entropy. It wants to kind of degrade over time. The business changes. The company that you're building the model for is, bought a company or spun off a company, or, had a major change, or the model has been sitting dormant for 1.5 years and somebody's called you in to like fix it or do something to it. And as it changes, what winds up happening is it gets too complex, right? There's just too many cubes, too many dimensions, too many processes. All this stuff is happening constantly. And you're trying to keep up. And, I know some of the folks on this call today are technical. You're trying to keep up with the architecture, and you've written down some stuff, but you just can't keep it all in your head. Models are just too complex. And so what winds up happening is we get confronted with this problem of model complexity. And so we do the best we can, which is we say, I know what this part does, and I know how it connects to these other things. And the work I have to do right now, I know how I can make it work. So while there might be something in the model where I could change to make it work within the core of the model, I'm just going to code around it. And then the next thing, you're like, hey, we're too busy. I'm going to code around this. And then maybe another consultant comes in, and then they're going to code a few things around this. And then the company makes an acquisition. And now you've got maybe a third person involved. And what winds up happening is the model just kind of gets bigger and more complex over time. And give it 3 to 5 years, and most models are nearly unmanageable, right? And so now you're trying to get the senior architect in, and you've got a couple of weeks of discovery just to kind of wrap your head around it. And you've got all these meetings to really try to understand what the requirements are. When you initially sunk $250,000 to $500,000 into building, and running this planning model, this planning or budgeting forecasting model, or whatever that model is doing, all of a sudden now that model is degrading over time. And so, I've gotten this.
Well, Scott, could I actually, because you raised a couple of really important points there that I can sort of probably imagine people on the other side, even though we know that the videos are off, they're probably like nodding their head.
Yeah.
too. And some people like nodding their head a lot, or
Yeah.
their gut is sort of like starting to feel like, yeah, that's us. So, for the people that are here listening and watching here, so Rob and Sarah and Vlad, Pretty, Mark, Jennifer, in the chat box, based on what Scott just shared, like what parts of that feel most relevant to you? Is it, just trying to do the workarounds, for example? Is it that models are getting more complex because you've acquired another company? Is it because you've brought in a consultant who kind of like put together some, extension of the current model? What parts of that, or what part of that is the biggest factor for you? Because we want to direct this as a conversation and a discussion that's going to be relevant for you. So the more we know about your situation, the more that Scott can really talk about, these 4 different pillars that we're going to speak about. So in the chat box, I'd love to hear from a couple of you guys, just to make sure that we're clear on what your challenges are. So which of those is it? Is it more of the workaround? Is it the model is becoming more complex? Is it a situation where you've acquired somebody? Is it the consultant problem? Which one of these kind of resonates the most with you based on what Scott just shared about kind of setting up why we're here today? Love to hear from a couple of you guys in the chat box. Come on, guys. I know you can do it. Don't be shy. So Brian's saying probably loss of key personnel. Yeah, and the lack of retraining is a business issue. I think we've all experienced that with a lot of the cuts that just had to happen, back in March and April. So loss of key personnel. Yeah, Brian, thanks for sharing that. Lack of retraining. So how about for a couple of other you guys? Jennifer saying workarounds, different consultants working on the model, different implementation styles. Yeah, it's like, as much as we think about models as being this technical thing, there really is a craft to it. People have a style, they have an approach. They look at it and like, okay, this is how I approach building a model. It's not this cut and dry math equation, right? And the customers, of course, want those quick fixes. Of course they want quick fixes. We want you to do your best work, but we need it by Thursday. How many times do we hear that as consultants? Some good shares here. How about for 1 or 2 more of you? Jennifer and Brian, great shares here. How about the rest of you? Andrew, Mark, Preeti, is it Rolf is here with us as well. Sarah, Vlad, Rob, anything for you? Love to hear about that in the chat. Please put it in there so we can direct the conversation. So if we know this is the problem, Scott, you sort of described the model complexity and the cost involved, $500,000 in a lot of cases, I'm sure a lot more. How do these 4 pillars start to layer into, like, first of all, what are those 4 pillars? And maybe we could just spend 5 minutes or 5 or 10 minutes on each of those, just to kind of describe how you guys think about, relieving this model complexity and solving some of these problems that we're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good thing. And I've got a couple of actually kind of little stories, war stories that I've heard over the years. A tool to parse all the processes and rule files. Yeah, I definitely hear that as well, Vlad. So, boy, there's so much information and there's so many things to talk about. So what we've tried to do is condense it down to make it easy to talk about, make it common. So if I had to choose only 4 things that I wanted to do in order to ask a question and get an answer from a model, or find something or get something done, if I only had 4 things to do, what would I call them? So the first thing I need to be able to do is I need to be able to explore my model. Well, exploring my model itself, and actually, choosing exploration. It's I think you might have deleted the slide. Let me pull it up for you, Scott. Share my screen, Microsoft PowerPoint, share. So what we did was we broke it down into these these categories. So you want to be able to explore your model, right? And the reason you want to be able to explore your model is because there's certain things inherent in exploring your model. First of all, you have to conceptualize it. So any of you who have ever seen QUBEdocs or seen some tool like it know that there's probably going to be some sort of a Visio-like model diagram. Cubes, dimensions, how the processes and cube rules go between them. But the idea behind that is to create a map. So before you go exploring, you need to kind of have a concept. You don't just walk out into the woods, right? You look at a map of the trails and you walk out into the woods and then you say, hey, listen, we're going to take this route and go this way. There's a lot of things that are happening to deal with complexity just by having the map. So if you look out into a forest without a map, you would never consider walking out there. And you wouldn't consider just trying to like tiptoe a little bit, right? The first thing you do is say, we're not going out there until we have a map. And I know that, some of you in the chat here are consultants. you wouldn't start just messing with a model unless you understood how things link together. So it's important that when you think about a model, you really have a map of it. And so you have to start with a map of the model, a diagram, some sort of a picture of what it looks like. And if I do this, it connects to that and it leads over here. Now, the second thing that is really key is there's thousands, I mean, literally thousands of objects, sometimes tens of thousands of objects in a TM1 model. And the relationships can compound, even more, tens of thousands of relationships between, this, dimension is in 17 different places and affected by 10 TIs and, countless cube rules. So what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to say, I need to find something. I need to know something about the account dimension or something about the geography dimension or something about a calculation, right? And you need to just be able to, like Google, just type it in and search. And then not just see like it in one area of the model or just something you can see in your architect screen. You need to be able to see everywhere where it exists and what context it's in. And so you need kind of a Google for your model if you're really going to kind of understand impact. And then you kind of need to know how the model changes over time. And the reason you need to know how the model changes over time if you're going to be working on it is because the company changes over time and the requirements of the company change over time. Planning changes over time. I mean, the nature of planning is to say, hey, listen, what are we going to do different next year, right? And so we need to be able to compare how the model itself changes to meet the requirements of the customer. And we don't want to have to say, I need 10,000 objects on one screen and 10,000 objects on another screen and just look one at a time. We need to have some sort of an exception report. And then finally, you've got all this information. You can't keep it all in your head all the time. And so what you need to be able to do is take little notes, right? I just changed this dimension. These 3 cubes are related to, the forecasting application. We've audited these 17 processes, right? And so you need to have the ability to kind of take notes and describe or annotate. And so we've really tried to break down documentation into these really simplistic ideas and then map these ideas onto anything. So now, obviously, we make software. You guys, most of you guys know that, QUBEdocs makes a piece of software that helps document models. But even if you didn't use QUBEdocs, these are still the 4 things that you should be able to do in order to kind of know where you're at. Because if you walk out into the forest, you have no idea where you're going, and you find yourself in the middle and you can't get out, right? You're kind of stuck. And that's kind of what I mean by the model monsters thing, is that you make a change in a TI process, and all of a sudden it's affecting a report that doesn't usually get used, but somebody, in the accounting department just pulled it up because they wanted to, do some forecasting on, discount rates or, gross margins of something. So this is kind of what, Scott, when we're talking about our pillars, what we're really trying to say is there's too much information to think about it all the time. And we have to have a way of organizing it, whether you use software to do it, whether you program something yourself in TM1 or some other tool, or, whether you just keep these in mind when you're getting ready to work on a new model. This is kind of the way we think about it.
So I think that's a really nice, succinct way to talk about this flow that you're talking, that you get, the way you guys think about it. And as you said, whether you're using QUBEdocs or not, you've got to have these 4 pillars in place for all the reasons that you just mentioned. And so I think it's maybe just a good place just to pause for a moment or two. And I just put in the chat box, mentioning to people here that, this would be a good spot, maybe just to, as we said, and when Scott sent out his invitations to this conversation, we wanted it to be a discussion. So would really love to hear specifically if you got a question around any of these 4 pillars or any of the concepts that Scott shared so far, or even if you have a share, an observation that you found in your consulting work or something that you found in your work day to day in the larger context of your company that you think is, something that everyone else here on the call might benefit from, or might even have some suggestions, this would be a really great spot in the chat box to just type something in there. Or if you just want to write the word question in there, we've got a small group and we kept it small on purpose so that, we can just take you off mute, give you a chance to ask that question or make that share. So you can either type the word question or type the word share into the chat box, just so that we can make sure that you're getting as much out of this as, again, we don't want this just to be Scott talking head. We can certainly do that. But I'm sure that you might have a question or two or a share or two. So please let us know in the chat box. What observations do you have, or how is this maybe you've thought about it this way and this is the first time you've seen her articulate it in this form or fashion? How is this maybe a little different than the way you've been thinking about it before? Love to hear from a couple of you here in the chat box. In the meantime, Scott, while people are thinking about those questions, and I'm going to keep asking folks, by the way, because I want to make sure that you're getting the most out of this. I know sometimes people are, you're trying to manage a couple things at one time at home. I know on the other side of my wall, I've got an 8-year-old son. He's supposed to be homeschooling, but God knows what he's doing right now that his laptop is open. So we're all in that boat right now. But so please do feel free to jump in here with a share or a question. So in the meantime, Scott, based on your work, not just with QUBEdocs, but in your decades of experience doing this and handling the number of models that you've handled, which one of these four do you feel like, if you had to choose one, not to overgeneralize, but which one typically is the one that is the most difficult for either a consultant from the outside looking in or somebody that's running an FP&A department? Which one of these four is typically the most challenging for people to really make long-term impact? Because I think it's easy to say, well, we'll make this quick fix so we can do a better job searching the model, or we'll do this quick fix so we can do a better job describing the model. We're going to put our heads down and document the heck out of the model today, or this week, or this month, or this quarter. But which one of the four have you found to be the most difficult for teams to implement?
I'm going to give you one of those annoying answers. So it really depends on where you're coming from. And I want to explain that a little bit. Early in my career, I worked for a big software company. They had 20 million people installed, right? 20 million person install base. So the software was everywhere and it was struggling. There was a problem. People were having a really hard time getting it installed. And this was back in the day when it was hard to install software. It was buggy and it would fail and all that stuff. And my job, I had actually a bunch of knowledge base workers and ran a website. And so I had all this stuff to try to solve their problems. And I spent the weekend doing some reporting work on some data for customer satisfaction. And what I had realized is we had this database that nobody knew that anybody had, which was all of this telemetry data coming off of these failed installs. Our installer would, phone back to the website and tell us, oh, there's some big problem. And what I had realized is that there was a code. There was this tiny little code in there that said error code. And I thought, I'm just going to throw this thing into SQL Server and just see what it looks like. So I did a bulk import and ran a few queries. And I realized that over 50% of the errors, and I'm talking, we were clocking 5,000 to 10,000 an hour sometimes. And that's a lot of errors. Over 50% of those errors all came from one error code. And I'm like, that's unusual. I had no idea. And so I talked to the development team and I said, hey guys, what's going on with error? I think it was 900 or something. I don't even remember what it was so long ago. And as it turns out, the installer for the product was being built by the college grads that they just hired. And all of the senior developers had been promoted out of the group that built the installer. So the installer code was terrible. They fixed the installer code in 2 days. They had a senior guy come in. He went in, he fixed up all of the errors that the installer code had. And our errors on install dropped. And again, this is 20 million people trying to install this and use this software. It had an enormous impact. But the reason I'm telling that story is because I could have never searched the data until I imported it. And I could have never imported the data if I didn't have a framework for importing it. I didn't have a database to put it into. And so it's really important in understanding the idea that in order to search something, it has to first be somewhere that you can search it. And that's really, I think, the big thing that I would say. I noticed Vlad was saying that, he's already got a tool to kind of index stuff. Most consultants and developers and architects who are senior and have worked on a lot of models have already got their tips and tricks. What we're doing as far as our software company is we're automating that process for people all over the world who don't have time to build their own scripts and stuff like that. So the punchline to my answer is, search is the most commonly used out of all of the technical people that I've worked with. Everybody loves search because search is so awesome. I can just type in anything I want and I get to see context. I get to see where it's at. I get to see the dimensions used in these cube rules, these TI processes, these cubes. It's all on one page. There's code highlighting. It's like, oh, this is great. Like really good Google results. But what people don't see is what you have to do in order to search. If I don't take a snapshot of the model, index it, and put it into the framework, there's no search box and there's no database to search. And it, unfortunately, it doesn't come with TM1. So the answer is search. And that's the place that gets used the most from a utility standpoint. I would say the most powerful, though, and the most impactful is describe. Because once you've decided to do one thing, and then 2 things, and then 10 things, and then 100 things, you need to keep track. You need to somehow keep notes about what you're doing. And you don't want to do that offline. You want to do it in line with your documentation. So the ability to do stuff and annotate as you go, I think, is really impactful.
Yeah, that's I think a really good explanation. And I like how you explain that a lot of times we look at the surface level, I got to do this work, like I got to get this output, and we forget about all the inputs, the necessary inputs to get to that output. And so, like you said, it's like all of the work that goes into getting to that place. Like, oh, I need this thing here, cool. But to get that thing, you have to do like these other 17 steps first. And that's where I think the overwhelm probably gets for most people. They get excited about, oh, the outcome. If I do it right, I'll get this output. But then they turn around and go like, oh man, like I got to do all that work first, and they just say, forget it.
One of the other things that I'll mention, and it's kind of to Jennifer's comment, is everybody wants things. They want quick fixes. I can't think of an FP&A manager or a planning manager who isn't in a hurry, right? They got to get it done. They're late to prepare for planning season. There's some big thing that happened, they're behind, right? And so now when there's a consultant or a developer in the room being asked to do something in half of the time or a quarter of the time it really takes. By having an asset, right? Like a copy of current documentation that has real tools that allow you to kind of step back and take a look at that data set, like I did when I was looking at that error code. By being able to step back, yes, you're going to be able to probably do and answer your questions a little quicker. You're probably going to look a little bit more on top of it. Like you're not like scratching your head and saying, hey, do you know what this does? You're going to be able to tell the client, I know what this does. I can see it right here. It's really easy. And I can show you right here. And so you get instant expertise, right? Instant authority with your client if you're a developer. But the most important thing is that when you step back and you're looking at that little problem that you're trying to solve, or coding up a TI process, or importing some new data, or changing the logic in a cube rule, what the real value is all of a sudden you step back and you go, oh, I see that there's something bigger going on here. Like, do you guys realize that you have all this data and you've been talking about this business problem that you have, and the data's right here? We can solve that problem for you really quickly and produce to the customer what looks like a really big project, but to the developer is just like maybe a couple of reports or a new cube or a different view, right? And so you start to get this context and you start to really be able to see where the value in the model is. And this is a conceptual thing that you just can't see until you take the step back. So, my opinion is that by slowing down and documenting your model, and you don't have to slow down to do it, because if you use a tool like ours or you build some scripts, you can click a button and have it done for you. But by slowing down and taking a look at it, you'll bring a lot more value to the table, even as you're just doing the little fixes. And for consultants and developers, that means doing 10 projects to one, or it means instead of a $3,000 SOW, a $30,000 SOW, or maybe a long-term engagement, or maybe 2 more consultants on the project. So it can make a really big difference to kind of be able to step back and say, I'm going to really try to find the additional value, in here.
Okay, that makes good sense. And I've gotten a couple of messages for folks. I know a lot of times in these sort of group environments, folks are sometimes a little bit less likely to post stuff in the group. So I've gotten a couple of DMs from people. So some questions that came out was a couple of product related questions, which I know we can certainly answer for you in a moment or two. But one more sort of process, related question about models, not directly with respect to QUBEdocs and the product. For somebody who's sort of like stepping into a situation where they're either like a new consultant altogether, just now doing TM1, or even somebody who's been doing TM1, consulting for a long time, and now they've got this new engagement and they're stepping in and they're trying to deal with, okay, well, at least we're inheriting all these old client models. It's sort of like, hey, good news, we have a model. And you're like, oh shit, like we have a model. Like where would you start to think about approaching to get some visibility? Like if you're inheriting this model and you're stepping right in, like where's the first place that you feel like people should be starting in order to get visibility as to what's going on with the old model and where these potential landmines might be, like you described, that situation where this one error code led to thousands of errors. So is there a place that you would tell somebody, if you only have time to check this one thing, you got a week to like figure out what's going on, what would that advice you'd give to people be?
Yeah, there's a short answer and a long answer. So I'll start with the short answer. The short answer is you just need to be able to show the customer that you know their model better than they do. And for a consultant, imagine you walk into a room and the customer has drawn what they think their model looks like on the whiteboard. The only thing is, the rule is to walk into that room to have a conversation about their model, is that you have to be blindfolded. You don't get to look at their model. That's actually what's happening. Without a picture of the model, the customer has a picture in their mind, but you don't yet because you haven't seen it. And it's going to take you some time to build that picture in your mind. Imagine though, you walk into that room and the customer has a picture of the model in their mind that has 7 or 8 cubes and a bunch of lines between it. It's a pretty simple model, but you have a picture of it in your mind of all the control cubes and all the relationships and how they flow, and everything centers on a couple of really key cubes. You now come into the room not just with a better picture of the model, but a better understanding of a number of things on how that model works. Just having a picture of the model, just having a diagram of the model, even if it's not to the letter perfect, right? Even if some TI, isn't necessarily connecting exactly to where it needs to be, you're going to be so far ahead of the game in that first meeting that you're going to get instant expertise. And oftentimes, whether you're in an internal developer or an external consultant, your value, the thing you're selling, is your ability to demonstrate instant expertise. That's what the model diagram does, and that's, we put that in what we call explore, right? Your ability to explore it, but before you can explore it, you have to be able to conceptualize it.
Okay, that makes really good sense. And so maybe that's a good opportunity for us to segue into a couple of the product related questions that some people have been asking, so that we can knock those off. And before we do that, at the beginning of the conversation, I'd mentioned that we're going to talk through models and talk through these frameworks. And then if you wanted to get some more help, in terms of thinking about this framework and how this 4-part framework, the Explore, Search, Compare, Describe, would apply to your situation, we mentioned that you could schedule in what the QUBEdocs team calls a model visibility session. And so what that's designed to do is really just a discussion where, and you could probably do a better job at explaining this stuff since you've run on many of these sessions over the years. It's just an opportunity for you to see how these apply and where you have an opportunity to get some quick fixes, make some quick progress, and then think about where you need to be working on the long run. So when people think about that model visibility section, after spending that time with you and your team, like what would be the one key outcome for that session. And while you're describing that, what I'm going to do is put a link into the chat box where the folks listening can schedule in if they want to just check their calendar, schedule one of those calls.
Yeah, actually, this conversation itself is a good example of what a model discovery session or model visibility session really is. And the point of it is for us to have a discussion, not for me to zip through a PowerPoint deck and show you our value proposition. And, we'll have Ross like click through and do a demo. That's useful, but it doesn't really make sense to do that until later. Imagine you had this big book and I said, there's this really great story in this novel, but I didn't tell you what chapter it was in. You got one choice: read the whole book or don't ever learn the story, right? You don't ever get to hear the story. So my job for the model visibility session is to tell you what chapter that story's in and tell you what the interesting part is, and then give you a chance to tell me what your thoughts are about that story. And then together we kind of talk about whether it's you're interested in solving a problem with your model, you've got a tough client, maybe you're trying to get into a new market and you've been working with pharma and now you really want to scoot over and start doing some consulting with healthcare. And it's really about me sharing what I've learned over the years and the parts of, and I'll do it, based on QUBEdocs, but it doesn't have to be. Again, Vlad's got some scripts that he's running himself. I know lots of consultants have a lot of their own scripts. This isn't about necessarily, getting you a copy of QUBEdocs or getting your customer a copy of QUBEdocs. It's more about talking through how you focus these pillars and maybe some other ideas, kind of laser focus them on the problem at hand. Again, whether it's a particular model you're working on, maybe it's a particular client, or maybe it's really almost like a market segment or a business development type of thing. We can I can narrow in on that, and it's almost like a planning session. And the second stage of that too is after a model visibility session. And again, it's not a demo, it's a conversation about narrowing in on what we should be talking about. Then once we find something to talk about and we think it's important, then we can partner with you around whether it's showing this to your customer or having the discussion, supporting them with, you guys should see, you have model diagrams or something like that. And then you can just use us as kind of a auxiliary, software sales team to help you present this, whether it's internally to your team or your boss or whoever's buying it or to a client. So it's kind of a middle step.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so, just think of it as like a pro bono consulting session. I know, these are sessions that, Scott has charged lots of money for in his career just to do this consulting with people on a one-off basis. So it's a good opportunity just to learn from his expertise and from Ross's expertise as well. And then obviously, it seems like it's a good fit to help you solve some of the problems that the team at QUBEdocs helps you uncover when it comes to model visibility. And of course, we can always talk about the product a bit more. We do have a couple of product-related questions here from some folks, Scott. So I think it would help to give them just like a mental model of QUBEdocs and how it fits into these four pillars that we're talking about here. So one question is around like T1 process control in terms of getting information about the last developer who modified the process. Does the platform, like, how does it report user logins? How does it report, what sort of reports are available from which data from different user data and when it's been modified? Like, how do you guys address, those types of questions, or how does the software?
Yeah, so I'll answer it at a kind of a conceptual level, and then maybe we can do a follow-up.
Perfect.
That's a really good question that a model visibility session is kind of designed to answer, which is to dig into exactly like, this is how you find it. This is how I would find it with my product. This is how you should find it if you're not using our product, right? If you're just using Architect or some other tool. But there's two concepts that you need to really hold in your mind when you're trying to solve problems around things that require documentation. And documentation is just information about what happened or what is. You have snapshot information, which is point in time. It's very important that snapshots have a point in time. In other words, they're not real time. You don't want to know the latest information. You want to know the latest information at the point that the snapshot was taken. And you compare snapshots, because when you have two snapshots, then you can get a comparison or an exception report. And what that allows you to do is just see what's changed, okay? So it's important to be able to say, I don't want to see 10,000 things, I want to see 3 things, just the things that changed. That's a snapshot. The second piece, and this is getting back specifically to how do I know what user logged in, who ran a TI process, et cetera. Now you're talking about real-time information or monitoring. That's going to come out of primarily the audit log, the server log. And we've got a log file tool that goes along with QUBEdocs, and I can show you that and kind of show you the log lines that you'd be paying attention to. So if you're parsing logs yourself, we can show you kind of how we do it. We use Elasticsearch, which is what IBM uses, and we've got a bunch of dashboards that will, basically pick out exactly what a user did. You can literally type in a username and it'll tell you everything that user did, and you'll have literally a one button click audit of a user. Or if you want to see what the longest running TI process is, we've got a health check dashboard that's pre-built for all your TIs. So it shows you which ones are erroring, which ones are running long, which ones are being run most frequently, what the variance is from the average. So are they running longer this week, but the average is much lower? And so it's a really nice little tool to be able to answer, again, a bunch of conceptual questions about a lot of detailed data. Because we've aggregated it, you get the chance to not just answer the specific question that you want, but also be able to get the conceptual learning from it, so that you can come with the, I need to fix this now, and this is what we need to do to fix this structurally for that continuous improvement part that we talked about.
Okay, great. And so as a follow-up, there's another question here about, is there any support for TM1 perspective reports? So for instance, a client wants to rename a dimension element, and we need to make sure it doesn't break any of the existing reports. So somebody might already have their own tool where they can scan the perspective files, find references to the elements, and do replacements. Like how do you guys work with these TM1 perspective reports?
We don't, the perspective reports are not in the diagrams, but anything at the metadata or the architectural level, you're going to be able to search all of the metadata right from the screen. So you can see, what dimensions are in what cubes, and all the way out to basically a web view. When you get to perspectives, there's only so much we can do when we get into Excel. So without like installing a kind of an Excel add-in, which is unfortunately very problematic, they tend to be buggy and not work very well, and they conflict with security concerns. We kind of stop at the web view. So I think the no bullshit answer to that question is we do about 75% of it.
Okay, great. And I think that's, sometimes I always feel like, I remember years ago, I was doing some work with lending in the lending space. And a lot of times the executives in the lending world, they always wanted to see everything in a spreadsheet. Yeah. Like, I got to be able to download these data into a CSV so I can get into a spreadsheet. And they always ask like, oh, does your software enable downloads of CSVs? And the answer is like, no. And they're like, why not? And it's the old Henry Ford, if you ask people what they want faster horses. So a lot of times, I think a lot of us, we get a perspective like, oh, this is the way we're doing it. And there could be a different way or an alternative way or augmented way that actually there's a reason why you guys built, why we built the platform the way you did.
Well, and specific to that question, the problem that you're experiencing is a tactical problem that's happening on a regular basis. The solution to it, if it's tactical, will put you in a place to have to click the button every time they click the button. What you want is a systemic solution. So that's where you get into continuous improvement, and you can't continuously improve your model and engineer out the ability for people to break things, right? That's the real goal for an architect, is to engineer out the possibility for the model to be broken. And that's, really what, a lot of the data that we'll show you will focus on.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more, and I guess it's like somewhat of a product, it is a product related question, and I want to make sure we get people out of here as well. And again, in the chat box is where you can see a link to request one of those model, or scheduling one of those model visibility sessions. So with the product itself, it's actually a two-part question. What does the install exactly look like? And what I mean by that is, how is it installed? And sometimes like the question we got here is, it appears to be a package of model objects that get dropped into the data folder, but there are probably some additional nuances as well. So Like when somebody's using QUBEdocs, how does that look? How does that install look to the
Sure.
user?
Yeah. Specifically for QUBEdocs. Well, let me and just back up and say again, this is everything we talked about today can be done without QUBEdocs. It's just a lot more work. So, but in order to get QUBEdocs, you get two choices, right? You can install it locally on a server, on a Windows server. You drop some objects in the TM1 folder and run a TI process. It's really straightforward. We say give yourself an hour to do it. It's really going to take you about 10 or 15 minutes. The even easier way is the cloud server. So literally just, put in your credentials for your server, and we're going to basically access the model via the REST API. We'll index the entire thing, and you will literally have a complete copy of documentation in under 10 minutes. So it's the type of solution, and we, I was really specific when we made the big lift a few years back to put the product up in the cloud. My thing was, I want a consultant to be able to show up at lunch, have lunch with the client, and be able to run a copy of documentation before a 1:30 or 2 o'clock meeting. And that was really my goal. I think we greatly exceeded that. I mean, you can literally walk into a client and be an expert on their model and having never seen it, and be able to start talking about, solution and discovery almost immediately.
Okay, great. Well, listen, I think we're running up here towards, top of the hour, and I want to be respectful. We all, everybody's taking time out of their day, and for some of us, it's, lunchtime because I saw you're in Minneapolis, and other folks are in other parts of the country here. So, El Paso is Mandan, North Dakota, is where Ross is, of course. Atlanta is where Rob is. So listen, so for the folks here, is there any sort of like last concluding remarks or thoughts, as you're going out there and you and your team? I mean, you're talking to hundreds of consultants and FP&A people every single month, asking questions about not just QUBEdocs, but like how to think about modeling, and especially in the world that we're in now, where there's such rapid change and teams are getting, are smaller in some respects, and consultants are trying to figure out stuff more quickly. What's one last sort of piece of advice or perspective that you can give to the folks here? And then we can do a wrap, and then we can wrap up here, Scott.
The thing that I've said for years, and, I know most of you guys are either in or around the consulting world, and the TM1 is a consulting product, really, so it's not unusual. You can't transfer knowledge. We've all heard it. We're going to do a knowledge transfer session, right? We're going to get the documentation together. We don't have time to do a bunch of documentation. We'll just have a knowledge transfer meeting. You cannot transfer knowledge if you have not captured it. So really what that meeting is, that knowledge transfer meeting is, let's get together in a conference room, chat for a few minutes, and I'll tell you what I can remember about the model in an hour. That's what they should title that meeting. They shouldn't call it a knowledge transfer meeting, because there's no way you can transfer the knowledge of a senior principal consultant who's been architecting TM1 models for years. They're just not. You just can't turn that. You can't you have a magic wand and turn in, your client's junior developer into you in an hour. Knowledge transfer requires knowledge capture, and there's no reason you should be capturing that by hand. So that's my little be easy on yourself. Just, sign up for the thing, get a trial, do whatever, talk your customer into buying it, and just click the button. And we'll keep the snapshots going. We'll have the model documentation there for you whenever you need it. We'll be able to tell you what's changed over time. We'll have the log file analysis, pre-built dashboards. It's just easier. So
yeah,
that's
I like that. So knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer requires knowledge capture.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good tweet.
Thanks.
That could, yeah.
I would have to actually log into my Twitter account for that, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, everyone, really, really glad that you could join us today. Thanks for accepting the invitation. I know, like we said, we wanted to keep this small because we wanted to be able to address individual questions like this. We've obviously gone through a lot with the 4 pillars, the way that Scott and his team think about, the model, this idea of what's lurking in your planning model. And this is obviously a case where if you can implement these 4 pillars, again, whether using QUBEdocs or not, then that will help you uncover these model monsters that he's talking about. And again, absolutely take advantage of the model visibility session. Go ahead, Scott. One last thing.
Yeah, I just, before people start leaving, I also wanted to say with the model visibility session, I want to do two things really quick, which is I'm going to click this link so it shows up on my browser. And then I'm going to share my browser if I can find it, all of the things I have open here. Share. Where's my browser? Google Chrome.
It's over there to the right.
There we go. All right, so if you click that link for the model visibility session, this will show you our calendar that, you know, for that we have times available for doing one of these model visibility sessions. You literally don't have to ask us for a time. You don't have to see if we're going to be available. If we're available, it'll show up on this calendar. You just click the button and choose a time, and that's it. And the other thing I wanted to say is this doesn't have to be a model visibility session for you. It can be with your customer if you're a consultant, or it can be with your boss, or it can be with a colleague. So feel free to use this. This is kind of a free service for us. Of course, we're going to say, hey, listen, it's better with QUBEdocs, but you know, we're going to show up and help you understand how, you know, kind of how we would approach solving a particular problem that you guys are having. So super easy. Click a button, choose a time, click confirm. We'll show up.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thanks everyone again for joining the session. We'll make sure to, we are recording this, assuming that Zoom allows us to convert it and all that stuff. If you feel like there's a colleague or something that you feel could really benefit from watching the replay, then just let us know and we'll be happy to share it out with you afterwards. And again, one more time, I'll just, I know there's been some people chatting in the chat box, just in case you missed the link to the model visibility session. I'll put it in there one more time just so you have the link. And if you're not sure how to, like, if now's the right time, like if you don't know which day right now works, just grab a copy of that link, and then that way you can just schedule it or meet with a colleague or two and pick a time that works to meet up with Scott and his team. So, all right, everyone. So look, thanks everyone for joining. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad we were able to knock this out and get you this great content. Thanks for joining. And I think it's going to be something we'll be doing more regularly as well. So, you know, different conversations. I mean, we're just obviously just talking about the broad models, and certainly can see, yeah, we get Scott back into his into the matrix. I love it. But certainly we're looking to do this on a more frequent basis, and almost think of it as like a series of discussions and conversations around models and visibility and planning, because, you know, obviously this time of year is one of the most critical times to be thinking about the model, and you're unraveling what has been done earlier this year and in past years. So the more that we can help you out with, you know, making progress and really thinking about, like, how do we do this the right way going into 2021 and beyond, getting away from, you know, the hashtag 2020. We're all waiting for this to be over and getting into a new place. And this could be really a good opportunity for you to, you know, make your life easier and make you a lot more effective as a consultant or an FP&A manager. So, all right, everyone, I think we're going to call it a day here. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again next time. Great job, Scott.
Talk to you all. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
All right. Bye.
Looks like everybody dropped off.
Everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Recording stopped.